bit early because I don't want to cut into our esteemed panelists' time too much. But I wanted to share with you some background, some context for why we decided to host this panel in particular on Vietnam War readings, and really the inspiration for this whole festival, which Francoise touched on earlier before our first panel. But if you're from Madison County, I'm sure you'll remember this, but in early 2023, our school board banned nearly 24 books from the high school library. And there was a system in place whereby parents could restrict their children from getting this book or that book, but the school board overrode all of that and removed these books altogether. And they included works, anything they had on the shelves by Toni Morrison, Stephen King, and I think Stephen King is the most widely banned author in the country at this point. The Perks of Being a Wallflower, Sarah Ma's Court of Thorn and Roses, any number of books that, a lot of them really appealing to younger people. And it was a challenging time for our county, for our community. It put us, unfortunately, in the national spotlight. Margaret Atwood, and of course, Handmaid's Tale was one of the banned books, but Margaret Atwood wrote about Madison County in the Atlantic magazine. You know, this is really not what we want to be known for, this beautiful county, but there we were. Stephen King, Jodi Picoult, a number of authors tweeted about us. There was one tweet, I think it was a reporter in Roanoke, who was one of the first to sort of break this news, because we were a little ahead of the game on this, that we had banned all these books, and that tweet alone got more than 500,000 views. So, like I said, it was very uncomfortable, it was a challenging time. And a number of us, I think this is important to say, a number of us did speak up. A lot of people in this room were among those who spoke up or wrote letters. But I recall two young women in particular, two very brave students who were students at the high school. And they stood up and spoke during the public comments. And they both said essentially the same thing. And we heard about it a little bit in the first panel, I think, in particular from Jeffrey. They said, reading, I think the two books they mentioned were The Perks of Being a Wallflower and The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. And they said those books helped lift them out of depression and helped them feel less alone and less isolated. I remember they said specifically, you know, I realized I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one who was feeling the way I feel. And one young woman in particular said, this book saved my life. And it was really heartbreaking. I mean, it was heartening to hear that young people are reading these books and they're having an impact on their lives. But it was heartbreaking because our school board was unmoved. And they went ahead and banned all of these books. But what I wanted to also bring to your attention is that several months earlier, in 2022, June of 2022, our school board was reviewing a series of new literature textbooks. And there was one for each grade. And I reviewed these textbooks. They are wonderful. And another shout out to our librarian, Bonnie, because she immediately got the new textbooks. They're in our library. I think they're in the genealogy room. You can go in and review them. There's also supplemental information online that I think librarians can help you access. So they were reviewing these new literature textbooks. I should say that the librarians also got all of the banned books that were banned in the high school library. Those are all available in our public library. That's wonderful. So they were reviewing these literature textbooks, and they made, and certain members of our school board made approval of these books conditional. And they said that we are only going to approve these books if we ban certain readings from the textbooks. So they banned, I think it was 12, 13 different readings. included James Baldwin's beautiful letter to his nephew, written in the early 1960s, My Dungeon Shook, which is the opening piece in The Fire Next Time. They banned that, so teachers are prohibited from teaching it. You've got to skip over it. They banned Anna Quinlan's essay, A Cult of a Country. They banned Kate Chopin's wonderful short story, an early American feminist piece, The Story of an Hour. They banned Justice Brennan's opinion, a Supreme Court opinion in Texas v. Johnson, which is the flag burning case. They have to skip over that. And they banned 2 readings about the Vietnam War. And we're here to discuss that today. So they banned Dr. King's, it's often referred to as the Riverside speech. It was a speech he gave in 1967, very controversial at the time, opposing the Vietnam War, a landmark speech. And they banned Tim O'Brien's short story, Ambush, from the book, acclaimed book, The Things They Carried. It's a semi-autobiographical collection of stories he is the Vietnam War veteran. So they banned that. And let me read to you the specific reason, and I'm almost finished. The specific reason that they banned these books from the textbooks, in this case, was failure to promote love of our country, citizenship, military service, or they present an unbiased approach to these topics. So that was their rationale for banning these books. And I want to share with you, this did not sit well with me. I don't know how it would, all of you would react, but I lost a lot of sleep over this. And I'm a fan of a historian at Princeton, a professor of history named Kevin Cruz. He's a well-known scholar, especially in 20th century history. And he did a piece about Dr. King, which I read, and so I wrote to him and I told him what had happened with Dr. King's speech. And that they had banned it, and that students were not allowed to discuss it. And here's his response. That's outrageous. King's Riverside speech against the war is one of the most important speeches of the decade. Focusing on, let me skip over this part. The speech marks the break MLK made with LBJ and highlights the pivotal tension between America's domestic and foreign policies. Your school board seems to not understand that history that solely celebrates the nation's institutions isn't history. It's straight up propaganda. And that's what has no place in schools. So that was his view. And with that, I am now going to introduce our panelists, so you have some context for this discussion. Professor Clifford Haury is an adjunct faculty member in the School of Continuing Education and Professional Studies at the University of Virginia. He is Professor Emeritus and former Dean of Humanities, Fine Arts, and Social Sciences at Piedmont, Virginia Community College. He holds a BA from King's College and a master's degree and PhD from UVA. Cliff was drafted into the U.S. Army from graduate school in 1968. He enlisted for 3 years to pursue a specialty in military intelligence. Because he held a master's degree in diplomatic history and Russian studies, he earned a direct commission as a second lieutenant in the Army after attending basic training. He then attended the Defense Language Institute, where he studied Vietnamese, followed by the Army Signal and Intelligence School at Fort Gordon, Georgia. Cliff was deployed to Vietnam in July 1970. He was assigned to the 4th Detachment, 525 Military Intelligence Battalion in the Mekong Delta, where he was made Assistant Operations Officer. He served for 1 year and was responsible for writing intelligence reports for the Defense Intelligence Agency. He returned to graduate school in 1971. Cliff has taught the Vietnam War at the college level for decades. Currently, he is teaching a course entitled American Society and War, from Vietnam to the War in Afghanistan. Many of you know Charles Jameson, in the middle. I should say that Professor Haury is going to begin with a discussion of Dr. King's speech. And then Charles is going to read in its entirety the short story Ambush. That only takes about 5 minutes. He is a Culpeper native whose family has lived in this area since the 18th century. After attending segregated schools, including Carver Regional High School, where he graduated in 1965, Charles studied at VCU and Virginia Union University, graduating in 1970. He was drafted into the Army just 2 weeks before his graduation. After basic training at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and advanced training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, Charles was sent to Vietnam, also in 1970. He served as a section chief computing accurate fire for the 11th Armored Cavalry Artillery. His service earned him several honors, including a Purple Heart, Bronze Star, and a Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry. Charles continued to serve in various roles in Vietnam, including supporting the 1st Brigade, 5th Infantry Division on the DMZ at Fire Base Charlie 2, and later with the 101st Airborne on the Laotian border, earning additional Bronze Stars and Army Commendation Medals. He returned home in November 1971. Charles spent much of his career in construction, has always been active in our community. He is a longtime member of NAACP Culpeper and received the branch's President's Award just last year. He is a supporter of the Carver alumni, the Carver Forthman Museum, and has been recognized with many other awards, including the 2020 Scrabble School Foundation MLK Dream Keepers Award and Aging Together's 5 over 50 Award. Charles is passionate about his ancestry and the heritage of African Americans, especially their role in the military and the Culpeper region. He is dedicated to researching and teaching about African American participation in the Revolutionary War and enjoys speaking to students and supporting events at the Culpeper Museum of History. And finally, we have Clark Hall, another fascinating biographer. Clark grew up on a farm in Mississippi. From a young age, he was aware of and repelled by the racial injustice he witnessed in the Jim Crow South. His father was a quiet champion of civil rights in their community and set an example for Clark that represented generosity and respect toward all. When I noticed that he was from Neshoba County, I thought about this. He was a young man when the 3 civil rights workers, Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Nicky Schwerner, were murdered just a few miles from his family farm. So we will have to have another discussion about that another day. He attended Kansas State University and then joined the Marine Corps, fulfilling a lifelong goal. His unit was deployed to Vietnam in June of 1965, where he joined Delta Company, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, 1-9. Throughout the war, 1-9 earned the nickname the Walking Dead for enduring the longest sustained combat operations and suffering the highest killed in action rate in Marine Corps history. Of the 200 men in his original company, more than half were killed in action. Bud spent the last 5 months of his time in Vietnam as Lieutenant General Lewis Walt's NCO Security Detail Leader. He was promoted to sergeant and was able to return to the U.S. as a drill instructor at the Marine Corps base in San Diego. He later returned to Kansas State University and helped start the Vietnam Veterans Against the War chapter at his school. Another interesting chapter. In 1971, he joined the FBI, fulfilling another lifelong goal, and spent much of his career investigating organized crime, including Sicilian criminal activities. He served as the gangland slayings coordinator for the Bureau and investigated crime, including complex RICO cases, in cities such as Las Vegas, Chicago, and New Orleans. He later worked on Capitol Hill, where he became chief investigator for the Iran-Contra affair. And it seems that this is also another deep discussion for another day. And finally, in closing, about Clark, more recently, he has become a historian and a champion for battlefield preservation. He is also a champion for reading. He taught himself to read at a very young age and has said he found his life's purpose to join the Marines and the FBI in the books he read as a child. So, thank you.
Thank you. Since I'm the history guy, I get to go first, and I'll give you a little introduction. Just last Monday, we had a class on Zoom at night at the University of Virginia, and guess what? We covered 1967 in a series speech that we're going to talk about. So we covered it in class, so I cheated a little. Didn't realize I had other preparation for this. So that's it. And of course, as she said, it was Martin Luther King's speech was at Riverside Church. And there's background that you have to know for each of these readings, Tim O'Brien in this one. And it was actually called Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence. And it was delivered on April 4th, 1967. Exactly 1 year before Martin Luther King was assassinated. 1 year, exactly. So, pause right there. The speech was widely criticized. The Washington Post, the New York Times, the NAACP, as well as notables like Senator Barry Goldwater of Arizona, Republican presidential candidate in '64, and many others. And of course, I want to point out to you that if you're in the category of wanting to unban this for yourself, Ken Burns' series on Vietnam has this covered. There also are 2 specials that are on PBS, Free at Last, and also A Call to Conscience on Martin Luther King. So unless they start taking down all our PDF videos, we still have access to a lot of this stuff. So I warn you, because that's actually happened in a few cases already from my history class. They've removed some stuff. And I think that's a tragedy of immense proportions, because a lot of that material is necessary historical material. Now, if you look at it, in the audience there are 3,800 people, and in it sat a young John Lewis, a man already notable in the Civil Rights Movement as a rising leader. So this is 1967. On the historical background, why would Martin Luther King go ahead and do this at this point? He worked with JFK, LBJ, and Attorney General Robert Kennedy, and many others to assist the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the War on Poverty in 1964, the Voting Rights Act in 1965. So he risked a whole lot doing this, speaking out after he was getting so. Now, you might ask, as I did my class, why was he going to do that? Well, in the war between 1965 and 1967, American soldiers started to suffer many killed in action, KIA. And King and others noticed that the African Americans had been placed in small arms infantry at a high rate. Therefore, they were the highest rated casualty. So, if you look back now, it took a while to sort this out. In 1960, the black population in the United States was 18.9%, and in 1970 it was 203,400,000. But what's the difference? In 1965, 24% of the killed in action in small arms infantry were African American, while the societal average was 18.9. In 1967, it dropped to 12.7%. And I asked my students why. Well, if you go to war and you're 18 years old, you have to learn fast. And if you learn fast, you do well. And so one thing about this is a lot of history books have wrong information. They say, oh my goodness, it exceeded the number of people in the population. Oh, terrible. Well, no. There's something that happens. You get experience and you get good at it. So what's the total though? 7,243 African Americans were killed in action. That represents 12.4% of all war casualties from 1965 to 75. So that's not way out of line with it. Now, why is it important? Well, King had joined a group called the Clergy and Laymen concerned about Vietnam. It had Reverend William Sloan Coffin of Yale University. It had Father Philip Berrigan from the Society of Jesus, Rabbi Abraham Heschel from synagogue in New York, and Dr. Benjamin Spock. If you remember those days, Dr. Spock was a wild anti-war veteran. So, that's the one I remembered. I had to look up a little on the other. So with these deaths in Vietnam and the unrest in the Watts riots from the previous August of '65, King made his speech. And he knew the jeopardy he put himself in. And I think that's important in all these cases, is that a lot of times we say, oh, well, you can do a sermon in church, but if you're already in jeopardy, think about it. Birmingham happened already, and Martin Luther King went in and did this, which wasn't going to gain him any friends, except those who really realized the power of his words. So I'm going to read you just some abstracts. And the reason I'll do that is there's 9 pages, single space, and we are not going to be here all that quickly. So let me start out. He says that the sermons he's speaking this morning is in a sense not the usual kind, but a sermon in an important subject. Nevertheless, it's one of the most controversial issues facing our nation. And one of the good lines comes in the second paragraph. Even when pressed by the demands of inner truth, men do not easily assume the task of opposing the government's policy, especially in time of war. Nor does the human spirit move with great difficulty against all the apathy, conformist thought within one's own bosom and the surrounding world. So, what's he saying? But we must speak. We must speak with all the humility that's appropriate to our limited vision, but we must speak, and we must rejoice as well, for in all our history, there has never been such a monumental descent during a war by the American people. So, he's laying it out, right, in his first couple of paragraphs where he's going. And he says, polls reveal that almost 15 million Americans explicitly oppose the war in Vietnam. Now, of course, one of the difficulties in speaking flows from the fact that there are those who are seeking to equate dissent with disloyalty. It's a dark day in our nation when the high-level authorities will seek to use every method to silence dissent. Oh my goodness. It's a dark day in our nation when high-level authorities will seek to use every method to silence dissent. That's a great line. I think you transpose that many years beyond that. It's also, the truth must be told. So he's going on to do it. And there's another thing I found out. If you go to Stanford University, they have a whole bunch of documents on this. He knew this was going to be a tough speech, and he did something he never did before. He read it. He didn't just speak it. A lot of that stuff is extra. And the reason he read it was he didn't want it to be misquoted. He wanted to have exactly what he said in his speech. So if you look at that, I tell students, a minister, when he's at his best, ad-libs a whole bunch, and this didn't happen. He read the speech. So, this sermon is not addressed to Hanoi or the National Liberation Front. It is not addressed to China or Russia, nor is it an attempt to overlook the ambiguity of the total situation, nor is it an attempt to make North Vietnam or the National Liberation paragons of virtue, nor to overlook the role they play in the resolution of the problem. Now, he goes on and says 7 things, major reasons. We're not going to read all 7. But the idea is, he says, I suppose it's not surprising I have 7 major reasons for bringing Vietnam into the field of my vision, my moral vision. It seemed that there was real promise and hope for the poor, both black and white, through the poverty program. There were experiments, hopes, new beginnings. Then came the build-up in Vietnam, and I watched as the program was broken, as if it were some idle political plaything of a society gone mad on war. I knew America would never invest the necessary funds or energies in rehabilitation of its poor as long as adventures like Vietnam continued. And of course, what truth is there in that? Yup, it's used to teach it in my little government class in high school, guns and butter. You can spend it on a war, or you can spend it on things in the society in the most simplest. And he would start by listing some of the other things that were objectionable. The war was doing far more devastating, the hope of the poor at home. It was sending the sons and their brothers and husbands to fight and die in extraordinarily higher populations compared to the rest of the country. Is that true? Did the poor fight the war in Vietnam? Yep, largely. And that's a subject of many books. Working Class War by Kristen Appy is a good one. If you see who got deferments and who didn't, it's not working kids, carpenters, So the other thing is, I like this line because he uses the contrast very well. We're taking black young men who've been crippled by society and sending them 8,000 miles away to guarantee liberties in Southeast Asia, which they have not found in Southwest Georgia.
Yeah.
East Harlem, or anywhere else. So what does he do? He lays it right on the line there. We're on number 3, don't worry. A third reason. I've tried to offer my deepest compassion and maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action, nonviolent protest. For they ask and write me, so what about Vietnam? What he says is that it is not alone a quiet thing, that you have to speak up and speak out, even at great risk, if you have a situation like Vietnam. And he makes the reference to the Freedom Ride. Freedom Rides, if you remember, were going down in Alabama, Mississippi. In those rides, both black and white were attacked, dragged off the bus, and nearly burned to death in the case of trying to bring attention to those states. And of course, what I'll say is there's something strangely inconsistent about a nation and a press that will praise you when you say be nonviolent toward Jim Clark, the sheriff, but it will curse you and damn you when you say be violent toward little brown Vietnamese children. That's something wrong with the press. So a great contrast there. And of course, the one thing that I think is important here is to have this man is appalling for this reason. He makes reference to his Nobel Peace Prize, and he would say, I would yet have to live with the meaning of my commitment to the ministry of Jesus Christ. To me, the relationship of this ministry to the making of peace is so obvious that I sometimes marvel at those who ask me why I'm speaking against the war. Could it be that they do not know the good news was meant for all men, all communists, all capitalists, whether children or ours, or black and white, for revolutionary and conservative? So he gets right on the topic. Have they forgotten my ministry is in obedience to the one who loved his enemies so fully that he died for him? Absolutely subversive, right? So I think we're coming to the end. I'm getting through here. Now let me tell you what the truth is. They must see America as a strange liberator. The Vietnamese people proclaimed their independence in 1945, which they did, but Harry Truman did not recognize it. Won't read the whole. They actually patterned their Declaration of Independence, if you look at the speech that was given in Vietnamese and watch the translation, the speech that Ho Chi Minh gave, the leader, was the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson. He actually copied a good portion of life, liberty, and the people who were, I always tell them classists, the people who were accompanying him on that stage, several of them were members of the OSS, a pre-runner of the CIA. And they had helped Ho Chi Minh get out the Chinese and the Japanese, and now the prospect was maybe the French would return. So even they were embarrassed by this, but Harry Truman did not, nor Roosevelt in his last days, did not do anything to assist that. Now, let's see. I will go to this. Get an intro here. About the Vietnamese. They watch as we poison their water, as we kill millions of acres of their crops. What's that reference to? What did they use in Agent Orange? Which is still with them, and it's still with us in a large way by those who didn't know how toxic things were. They weep as bulldozers roar through the areas preparing to destroy their trees. They wander into towns and see thousands of children homeless without clothes, running in packs like animals. They see children degraded by our soldiers and beg for food. They see children selling their sisters to our soldiers, soliciting for their mothers. We have destroyed two most cherished institutions, the family and the village. And what he says here is, we must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people, giant triplets of racism, militarism, and economic exploitation are incapable of being conquered. What a line. What a line for today. This is 67. So, and I don't want to take all the time, so we're going to skip some here. Okay. And what he comes to in the wind-up for his speech is really interesting. It's a combination of things, but I'm going to overdo on one aspect of it just to make sure we all know what the basic core message is. A genuine revolution of values means in the final analysis that our loyalties must become ecumenical rather than sessional. This call for a worldwide fellowship that lifts neighborly concerns beyond one's tribe, race, class, and nation is in reality a call for all-embracing, unconditional love for all. And when I speak of love, I'm not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I'm speaking of that force which all the great religions have seen as supreme, unifying principle. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door that leads to ultimate reality. This Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist belief about the ultimate reality is beautifully summed up in the first epistle of John. Let us love one another, for God is love. And everyone that loveth is born of God, and knoweth God. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. If we love one another, God dwelleth in us, his love is perfect. Downright revolutionary. Out of John's. And as the summary, let me say finally, I oppose the war in Vietnam because I love America. I speak out against the war, not in anger, not with anxiety, but with anxiety and sorrow in my heart. I speak out against the war because I'm disappointed with America. And there can be no greater disappointment when there's great love. I'm disappointed by our failure to deal positively and forthrightly with the triple evils of racism, economic exploitation, and military. We are presently moving down a dead end. So, must have been fun to meet John Lewis and listen to this. And, let's see. We'll get you to the end. Let us go out this morning with that determination, and I have not lost faith. I am not in despair, because I know there is a moral order. I haven't lost faith, because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And this is, I have a cousin in Connecticut who's older than I am, and we just a couple weeks ago, he was talking about current events and said, the arc of the moral universe is long but bends toward justice. So he and I had a little conversation about that. I can still sing, we shall overcome, because Carlyle was right, no lie can live forever. We shall overcome because William Cullen Bryant was right, truth pressed to the earth will rise again. We shall overcome because James Russell Lowell was right, truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways in the future, we shall overcome because the Bible's right. You shall reap what you sow. With this faith, we will be able to hew out the mountain of despair of our hope. And with this faith, we will be able to speed up the day when justice will roll down like waters, righteousness like a mighty spring. So you got a little Ezekiel from the Old Testament. And of course, this is something you've heard before because Martin Luther King Jr. to study him, he liked to use some of his endings the same. So you say, wait a minute, did I hear this in case of the letter from the Birmingham jail? You're going to find out, yes, you did. With this faith, we'll be able to speed up the day when all the world will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, thank God Almighty, we're free at last. With this faith, we'll sing it as we're getting ready to sing now. Then we'll beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nations will not rise up against nations, neither shall they study war anymore. And he says, and I don't know about you, but I'm not going to study war anymore. So if you look at that, I find it immediately a motivator for saying yes to Cindy, and not reading the whole thing, but if you do read the whole thing, they have it on video in the library. They have it in a PDF so that people can go and do it. And I think it's the combination that's odd to me is that it's a different form of patriotism when you protest. And what I would tell you is that right from colonial history, the United States has never had unanimity in what to do with government. We just have. Those of you that know about it can watch a PBS series coming up with Ken Burns, where he's going to cover the revolution. And when he was interviewed about this, he said 33% of the country, in the case of the American Revolution, didn't support it. So we always do that. We're cranky. Not all people will go for it. So, and I think that in the case of our class, we do it this way. We say, on the one hand, on the other. On the one hand, there are those that protested the war, and this is why they did it. On the other hand, here are the people that fought and were patriots, and this is why they did it. And there's a room in between. And I'll leave you with that thought. Martin Luther King had his faults on the one hand, had his virtues on the other. So did JFK on the one hand, and on the other. I haven't, along with my class, I haven't met the perfect person. But there would be absolutely no way that I want to exclude this kind of sermon in my class. Exactly.
Before I go into Tim O'Brien's ambush, I'd like to just speak about Martin's speech. Listening to King's speech and certain topics or words stood out. Communism, and it is Nigeria, conscious of the deaths while fighting in their country and actually feeling the South Vietnamese had little desire for this fight. A time comes when silence is betrayal, and this was the first time in history religious leaders rose up because usually men don't usually speak up against the government. He was speaking for the weak, for the voiceless, for the victims of our nation, and for those who called us enemies. And he also won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1954. Ambush. When she was 9, my daughter Kathleen asked if I had ever killed anyone. She knew about the war. She knew I had been a soldier. You keep writing these war stories, she said, so I guess you must have killed somebody. It was a difficult moment, but I did what seemed right, which was to say, of course not. and then to take her onto my lap and hold her for a while. Someday I hope she'll ask again, but here I want to pretend she's a grown-up. I want to tell her exactly what happened or what I remember happened. And then I want to say to her that as a little girl, she was absolutely right. This is why I keep writing war stories. He was a short, slender young man of about 20. I was afraid of him, afraid of something, and as he passed me on the trail, I threw a grenade that exploded at his feet and killed him. Or to go back, shortly after midnight, we moved into the ambush site outside my camp. The whole platoon was there, spread out in the dense brush along the trail. And for 5 hours, nothing at all happened. We were working in two-man teams, one man on guard while the other slept, switching off every 2 hours. And I remember it was still dark when Kiowa shook me awake for the final watch. The night was foggy and hot. For the first few moments I felt lost, not sure about direction, groping for my helmet and weapon. I reached out and found 3 grenades and lined them up in front of me. The pins had already been straightened for quick throwing. And then for maybe half an hour, I kneeled there and waited. Very gradually, in tiny slivers, dawn began to break through the fog, and from my position in the brush, I could see 10 or 15 meters up the trail. The mosquitoes were fierce. I remember slapping at them, wondering if I should wake up Kiowa and ask for some repellent, then thinking it was a bad idea, then looking up and seeing the young man come out of the fog. He wore black clothing and rubber sandals and a gray ammunition belt. His shoulders were slightly stooped, his head cocked to the side as if listening for something. He seemed at ease. He carried his weapon in one hand, muzzle down, moving without any hurry up the center of the trail. There was no sound at all, none that I can remember. In a way, it seemed he was part of the morning fog or my own imagination. But there was also the reality of what was happening in my stomach. I had already pulled the pin on a grenade. I had come up to a crouch. It was entirely automatic. I did not hate the young man. I did not see him as the enemy. I did not ponder issues of morality or politics or military duty. I crouched and kept my head low. I tried to swallow whatever was rising from my stomach, which tasted like lemonade, something fruity and sour. I was terrified. There were no thoughts about killing. The grenade was to make him go away, just evaporate. And I leaned back and felt my head go empty, and then felt it fill up again. I had already thrown the grenade before telling myself to throw it. The brush was thick, and I had to lob it high, not aiming, and I remember the grenade seeming to freeze above me for an instant, as if a camera had clicked, and I remember ducking down and holding my breath and seeing little wisps of fog rise from the earth. The grenade bounced once and rolled again across the trail. I did not hear it, but there must have been a sound because the young man dropped his weapon and began to run just 2 or 3 quick steps. Then he hesitated, swiveling to his right, and he glanced down at the grenade and tried to cover his head, but never did. It occurred to me then that he was about to die. I wanted to warn him. The grenade made a popping noise, not soft, but not loud either, not what I'd expected, and there was a puff of dust and smoke, a small white puff, and the young man seemed to jerk upward as if pulled by invisible wires. He fell on his back. His rubber sandals had been blown off. He lay at the center of the trail, his right leg bent beneath him, his one eye shut, his other eye a huge star-shaped hole. For me, it was not a matter of life or death. I was in no real peril. Almost certainly the young man would have passed me by, and it will always be that way. Later, I remember Kiowa trying to tell me that the man would have died anyway. He told me that it was a good kill, that I was a soldier and this was a war, that I should shape up and stop staring and ask myself what the dead man would have done if things were reversed. None of it mattered. The words seem far too complicated. All I could do was gape at the fact of the young man's body. Even now, I haven't finished sorting it out. Sometimes I forgive myself, other times I don't. In the ordinary hours of life, I try not to dwell on it, but now and then, when I'm reading the newspaper or just sitting alone in a room, I'll look up and see the young man step out of the morning fog. I'll watch him walk toward me, his shoulders slightly stooped, his head cocked to the side, and he'll pass within a few yards of me and suddenly smile at some secret thought and then continue up the trail where it bends back into the fog. Well, I know that mistakes were made. I was in artillery. I wasn't out in the field like Bud, but I saw many rockets. Would hear many times their bodies lying everywhere. Sometimes I also would hear seesaw. There's one round that's off. I know that there was mistakes made. I know that I'm sorry. When I read about 2 million civilian deaths in Vietnam, that was kind of hurting. Because I know we were given, sometimes we'd have foreign observers, but sometimes we'd be just given coordinates to shoot through it all during the night, different times. We had no idea. But it is what it is.
With the indulgence of my two distinguished colleagues, I'm going to stand, frankly, to allay anxiety. Two introductions, if you don't indulge this also, I'd like to make. The most courageous news reporter that I have known in Virginia, my oldest friend in Virginia, is Mrs. Kathleen Hoffman of Madison County. She spoke truth to power when it was not popular to do. To say that she told the truth all the time with vigor and wrote great editorials. Not only reported the news, great editorials. That's the best I've ever known. And also the executive director of the Foothills Forum, president. It's Emily Oaks Foothills Forum in Rappahannock County. They support local news, nonprofit news organization, and she's here representing Foothills Forum. Check them out. Check them out. It's worth your time. To get into 40 miles of bad road. On August 3rd, 1965, 60 years ago, almost to the day, an incident of war occurred foreshadowing the human, political, and military disaster, underscoring the absolute lunacy of the Vietnam War. And if only President Lyndon Baines Johnson, had heeded the harsh lesson learned on this date in 1965 and halted the war in its earliest stages, then hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese and 60,000 Americans would not have been killed over the next 10 years. If he would have taken this lesson, August 3rd, 1865. And in a crushing defeat, the United States, the war indeed ended in 1975. A 10-year human capacity brought on and sustained by misguided Texan bravado. Misguided Texan bravado. Long story made short, purpose here is only to briefly mark the occasion of the Cam Knee affair. Cam, C-A-M, knee, N-E. Some here will recall black and white filmed images of Marines burning down a village early in the war. This is that incident abbreviated. Marine historians endorse this account, and it has been finitely researched via report compilation personal interviews, and my own experience. The Camden Village Complex, thousands of villagers, comprised of 5 separate villages and about 500 thatched roof huts, stretched out along the Cowdoe River, 20 miles southwest of the Nang. Camden was well known, in fact, as a Viet Cong stronghold, and Baker Company, 1st Battalion 9th Marines, entered the large complex. A sister company of mine entered the complex the month before. Several Marines were killed, including my best friend, Corporal David Dale McKenzie, from Ann Arbor, Michigan, all-state high school football, basketball, and track. I tried that. Lost in July of 1865. So considering the gauntlet had been thrown and not yet picked up, there was not any doubt that Camden would again be visited by United States Marines. So in August, Delta Company, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, my company, about 200 troops, lined up a month later after the first incident in July. We lined up 3 platoons spread out in a rice paddy 500 yards west of the village complex. 500 yards west, a complete and open rice paddy. The village is beyond us, the sun in our eyes. Not a real good situation. As the hot morning sun squinted in our eyes, we headed out across the flooded rice paddy with the feet in water coming up to our groins. About halfway across the open paddy, the tree line on the right opened up with multiple automatic weapons hotly firing into our exposed flank. That's where I was. That's where my unit, my squad was on the absolute right flank. Revealing excellent tactics, the clever enemy knew exactly what they were doing in firing on our exposed right flank, my squad. We then commenced to running as best we could toward the fire. As Marines went down in the water, badly wounded U.S. Navy corpsmen, the heroes of our side of the war, U.S. Navy corpsmen rushed to their aid before these Marines drowned. Finally arriving at the tree line, we crawled up the steep bank, laid down, and then did considerable damage to retreating Viet Cong. Dead and dying bodies haphazardly laid about on village pathways and inside several huts. The enemy. Villagers, young, old, women, children, babies, were all shrieking, as in many cases, that Viet Cong soldier lying dead in their hut was where he was born. And the howling folks were his parents, or his wife and his child. Plus, our armed, loud presence terrified the village and the villagers, and then crying rose to high crescendos. Right then and there, this was our first serious combat experience in Vietnam. Right then and there, August 3rd, 1965, I thought there was something terribly wrong with this scene, as we had no idea who was for us and who was against us. But I shouted orders to my squad, and we kept moving throughout the entire complex as the retreating enemy fired back at us. Finally, returning to the village from the outlying jungle, we discovered that many of the huts were connected, linked, underground by a sophisticated tunnel complex. And great quantities of ammunition and weapons were uncovered under bamboo beds. All of a sudden, over the radio, this order: burn every hut down. Burn every hut down. There was the order, by radio, from the company commander, Captain Herman B. West. The order was in fact clear and non-negotiable, as are all military orders. What will happen to the wailing villagers, we thought? And even though their homes certainly facilitated war-making, the fact remained these rice farmers were innocent pawns, as Charles has pointed out. Innocent pawns suddenly caught between an indigenous insurgency initiated by a communist country, or Vietnam, and situated in a remote superpower ourselves, which had no earthly notion of the horrific strategic and tactical mess it was now getting itself into. We had no earthly notion of what we were getting into, the U.S. Marine Corps, the Camp or our country. What will happen to the villagers, we thought? So as gently as possible, we moved the villagers out of their homes. More screaming and more wailing ensued. An old grandmother, crying hard and holding a baby, crying louder, looked up at me, beseeching me. I could not meet her gaze, and carefully moved away from the hut. Flamethrowers were brought in. Hundreds of dry thatched homes quickly went up and leaped in flames. So in order to withdraw back to our amphibious tractors on the other side of the rice paddy, we moved out into the rice paddy under heavy mortar fire from that which we just left. Under heavy mortar fire from that which we just left. Us burning behind us, and not one of us felt good about it. And we, me included, rationalized the whole experience by saying to each other that this was a fortified village complex and therefore an appropriate target of war. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. An appropriate target of war? No, it is not appropriate at any time to target civilians in any war. Vietnamese civilians or American citizens. That is not the American way. It is not the Marine way. We knew it, felt it, and still do. Did we win any hearts and minds at Camp Meade? Or in the countless other villages we subsequently flattened, and search and destroy missions. Subsequently, we kept it up. Moving out across the countryside, encounter a village, burn it down. Burn it down. The war took off in earnest, and as it proceeded, the conflict never became anything other than America's war. Civilians were always caught in the middle. Who cared about them? Nobody but us. We grunts, as it turned out. But we grunts had no power to do anything but extend our heartfelt pity to them. The tragedy remains today. The lesson could have been learned at Camp Meade, August 3rd, 60 years ago, that America was never going to win the war in Vietnam. No, not ever. That evening, August 3rd, my company commander directed me to be interviewed by CBS correspondent Morley Safer. That reporter's film crew captured many images of us burning down the huts. That's what he captured. Not the dead bodies on the ground of the enemy, but us burning down the huts. I tried my best during that interview, which you can see on the Ken Burns Civil War series. I tried my best, unsuccessfully, to put our best foot forward, but I did not even believe what I was saying when I said it. And that interview shortly appeared after that evening, in fact, on Walter Cronkite's CBS Evening News. To compound my shame of deception, Ken Burns aired the same interview in his Vietnam documentary. People often ask me if I'll ever return to Vietnam. I have never returned to Vietnam, but if I did, I would hold my head in shame. Thank you. If I may, this is David McKenzie of Ann Arbor, Michigan, who's killed in Camp. That's it. I took that picture probably a week before he was killed. This is us leaving the village of Camp Meade. Ken Burns' series disappeared. That's me leading the squad out of the village. You see the burning huts behind us. Burning huts behind us. Those are people's homes. Those are people's homes that we were burning down. How do you think we feel about that today? And this is Morley Safer and his film crew. And these two Marines here would be killed shortly thereafter that. Bob Robertson, Oklahoma, and Rob Guthrie of Wyoming. Both of those who would be killed shortly thereafter. So, thank you very much. Cynthia, thank you very much.
Now comes the good stuff. You can ask questions. Kind of get in my class when it's 9 o'clock and I want to go. I really do want to ask questions, but it's not 45 minutes. So. Yes.
Thank you all for your service and thank you for what you shared. It's fantastic. As we move forward with this youngest generation, how should we be teaching the Vietnam War to young Americans? How do you want them to hold it?
Well, this country, it's really hard for me to say. I wish I could be more proud of my service in Vietnam. I would like to tell this story too. When I was in Florida, and I wear my Vietnam hat because believe it or not, you'll run into some other Vietnam veterans down there, you know. And so I was out there one day, and this young lady came up to me, and she said she was Vietnamese, and I told her, I said, you know, I'm really sorry about some of the things that were done there. And you know, she said, I'm so glad to hear you say that, because I just talked to a gentleman who told me I love shooting those gooks. You know, stuff like that, you know. I mean, people are different. People are different. And, you know. But I've learned, just like I said, learn about history. If it's the truth, you shouldn't tell it. You know, there's a lot of things that's coming up now. I'm sorry. We don't have, not everything is, we can be proud of. The United States, I mean, it's my country, but not everything can be, you know.
Now, I could follow up that in the history professor line. I've done a course on Vietnam and watched the material change 3 or 4 times already because things were hidden, things were kept secret, things were not told. And so what I would say for our students, the youngest ones, how I would do it was make sure you point out all those instances where things went wrong. LBJ knew information in 1965 that we could never win in Vietnam, and then the war went on for 10 years. So, oh boy, when we get to that topic, they say, what, you mean X number of people died because they didn't? So I think the students today, they're smart enough to grasp what you're saying. You just have to present the information. You don't have to make it one way or the other. You can just say, here's what happened. And people don't know, we just got through another class where Richard Nixon went outside the bounds of the United States government while he was a candidate and contacted the North Vietnamese and said, if you wait, help me get elected and I'll give you a better deal. So LBJ was trying his best to get this done. How many more people died because it took so long to 1973 before we awarded it? So sometimes you just have to lay it out there and then let the students start asking the questions. And I think the other thing I've done in the class is you can use converts and those things very well because they have things like CBS will do 60 minutes, 50 years from this or that. And I've showed some of the videos. They're not easy. But you know, a lot of the people, even Hal Moore, the Battle of Ya Drang, they went back to the battlefield. And see him embracing the generals that fought against him. Students are saying, what? You know, and the thing I'd say about this too is there's one big thing that I would tell students that hit me right from the start, being a draftee. I was drafted out of a home draft board in Connecticut, and then I signed up to get another year so I could pick a specialty like MI, and I did that. When you're in a situation that's like this, doesn't matter what color your skin is, what matters? You're in a firefight, what matters? Yeah, and having someone else also. So confidence, not the color of your skin, counts. So, you know, they make a trite phrase out of this, but band of brothers is the way it was. You didn't care what color the person next to you was if they were able to take that M16 and do the job. And I think, I told my students that after all these many years, I thought that the Vietnam situation was the most democratic war we ever fought, because we had a great cross-section of humanity in there. We had Native Americans, Hispanics, African Americans, and you all had to be a band of brothers or you'd lose your life. So I think it's an important thing to say that part of this story is the ability to see each other. I showed them a Ken Burns series last week where the person's going to training camp, and he said, I lived in a little town in the middle of Oklahoma, and I never saw anybody that was black, Hispanic, or Jewish. And then I went to basic training. It's for all of us.
If I may, my last 5 months in Vietnam, I was heli-lifted out of the jungle. Orders came in, helicopters on its way to pick you up. And Huey arrived, we had to cut out of the jungle a landing strip. Well, there was no landing strip before, just so the helicopter could arrive. And I was lifted out from my squad in the jungle. I'm looking down at them, they're looking up at me. I don't know where I'm going, I don't know when I'll see them again, and I never saw them again. The helicopter flew to Da Nang at the headquarters of the 3rd Marine Amphibious Force, where a general was in command of all the Marines in Vietnam, I Corps. I Corps, 2nd Corps, 3rd Corps, 4th Corps, I Corps, northern part of South Vietnam. All the Marines were there, and this general was in command. And I arrived not looking terribly presentable, not ready for the polo up there. And so I got out of the helicopter, and an aide approached me and said, come with me. And I was completely stunned, the captain, and I'm a corporal. Come with me, and they tried to take my weapon away from me before I went inside the bunker. And I said, nope, the weapon stays with me. And this was all foreign to them. These were staff people. So we went in, and there was this big Falstaff-in man with all sorts of stars all over his jacket. And I was now being interviewed to be the NCO security detail leader for all the Marines in Vietnam. I didn't volunteer. I'd like to go home. But he looked up at me without asking me a single question. He saw me as presented with my weapon by my side, and he said, you'll do. So I did. For 5 months, I was his security detail leader and brought other Marines on my unit of the Marines that I knew to serve as his security detail leader. If you want to know anything about Ann Margaret, I can tell you. If you want to know anything about Bob Hope, I can tell you. If you want to know anything, especially about Joey Heatherton, I can tell you. So, but at any rate, I was with him 24 hours a day for 5 months. I would sleep outside his room. Wherever General Lewis Walt, Lieutenant General Lewis Walt went, I was there with my detail. Just an amusing story, that story. Charlton Heston was there. And he's about like this size, by the way. You thought he might be a big guy? No, Moses is about like that. So he came out of the general's bedroom to his side, and he had a toothbrush, and he had a canteen of water. And he says, is this water safe to drink? And I said, yes, sir, it's safe to drink. And I then gave him sort of an insulting comment. We've been drinking this stuff for all so, but at any rate, the distressing thing, and I'm getting to the point here. When General Westmoreland, commander of all the service in Vietnam, when he would come to see General Wolfe, I would be in the room, seated over on the side, not seated, standing over on the side, out of the way. Myself and my security detail. And General Westmoreland, the only thing he wanted to know, he didn't know anything about hearts and minds, he didn't care. He wanted to know how many KIAs could the general report? How many killed in action could the general report? The general always had it ready for it. Tell him how many killed. He never asked how many civilians killed. And more civilians were killed than all of us put together. We killed them all the time. So I saw firsthand the military, the United States military, can be persuaded to go the way of a bad strategic idea. International. I saw that firsthand. General Wall didn't like any of it. He was there to prosecute an unwinnable war he didn't like. But there we were. But I could see how the only thing that they cared about was KIAs, not what we were doing to win the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese people. That was a joke. Westmoreland never asked, what are we doing to further the advantages of the Vietnamese people? He never asked.
I have to say, where Clark was talking about, he knows what happened to some of his friends that he was with. I was in 3 different units. I actually started, it was three college graduates, me and 2 other guys. And the guy, he was getting ready to deroast, getting ready to leave. He said, if you guys are not service oriented, if you have less than 5 months when you get back to the States, you can get out of the service. So we had to extend for 2 months like he did. And then he was getting a Christmas drop, so we really only have to spend 1 extra month. I did. I have no idea what happened to the other 2 guys. I didn't see them again. I ended up going up on the DMZ. I saw stuff like Arvin bases being overrun, B-52 bombers coming in and just blasting the hill. I had 52 guys buried on a bunker one night on the base that I was on. 32 of them died. And it's just, and then I ended up with the 101st Airborne. I had no idea where I was. I was on the Laotian border. I was involved. I got an accommodation for Lambs on 719. But that last night that we were there, we did not do any firing. I didn't know, but the Arbins were coming in. About 4 o'clock that morning, the guy on radio watch hollered out that he saw an arm coming down the bunker where our raincoats were, like somebody was trying to get our raincoats. So we all get up. The Arbins are coming in. They're taking over the bases. We're being airlifted out. But it was like, they were just all around in the bunker. You know, we're trying to get, one guy had to stay in the bunker because we had stuff. We even had a computer. We didn't use it, but we had a computer. How big is this guy? One guy had to stay in the bunker, one guy stayed at the comics box. But then I read about them after 30 days, they had gone in, the Army. After 30 days, they had been encircled by the Viet Cong. 2/3 went back north as prisoners, and the other third, it said, took them about 30 days to get back down south. But that was just very hurting. And I've had a helicopter pilot. One night we were at VFW, this is my last one. At VFW, he asked me about, what was I in Vietnam? So we were going through, and I said, Lamson, I was involved in Lamson 719. And he said, you know, I was one of the helicopters that got shot down at night. I was flying around because they're looking for where these rockets are coming from. And we're being given coordinates to fire where the rockets are supposedly coming from. We don't know there are helicopters flying around like they're looking for them. The only thing I could say to him, his friend got shot down, he got shot down. And the only thing I could say was, I hope that we were not the ones that shot down. Because we're following supposedly where the rockets come. You know.
Yes, my name is Pete Thompson. I live in Madison here and spend my time over there. And I've heard a lot of reference to Ken Burns, and he did do a lot. I've watched it, everybody's watched it. But the thing that, I was an 11B, infantry grunt, okay? the average 11B spent 60 days in the jungle without seeing any signs of humanity. You never got a shower, you never saw a flush toilet, you never got anything. You got your clothes were dropped out of a helicopter and you went through a pile to find something. If by luck you were able to get back to Benoit Air Base and wanted to go into the Air Force PX, they wouldn't let you in because you didn't have a name tag and a U.S. Army on your uniform, okay? So those people had a different outlook, okay? They're the people that would come in with their M16s and straighten the thing out. I mean, that's just the way they lived, like animals for their 8 or 9 months they were there, 60 days at a time. After 60 days, you get 5 days off at a fire support base. Okay? Now that's far, far from the rear. Okay? Not even running water there. But they had water buffaloes and they would heat the water up with the mess hall heaters and you could get a warm bath. Okay? And then to counter your ambush, being 11B, yes, that's, you know, I'm not a proponent of the war at all. I'm the most anti-war person you'll ever see. But I many times, or not many times, more than a dozen times, had to go out and pick up the bodies and pieces of bodies in the afternoon of people I'd had breakfast with in the morning. Okay? Now that has an effect on your psyche as well, because it could have been you. So anyway, that's just...
Well, thank you for that.
And Ken Burns doesn't get into that kind of detail.
No, he does the political thing, and it was a political one.
That's why the students that are in the class, they'll have a lot of good questions like that. And there are things that you can use as a teaching moment too. I'll say, I got drafted. And then we'll have to say, you have to go to the post office and give this little card and fill it out, or have an email sent because we're still with the draft. And some of them are looking at me like, what? And then we have a discussion about, well, now, if it's, you know, people don't know this either. Between 7,500 and 11,000 women were in Vietnam. All of them volunteers, all of them over 21. They were nurses. They watched lots of people die. It's a special gift that they had to do. And so then we have a discussion. A young woman down the street from me in Charlottesville stands next to her F-16 fighter pilot in the Air Force. And we have a discussion about whether any war we have in the future is going to involve women. And the draft's still with us. The one thing they did straighten out, though, that's in Vietnam is it never, ever should have been that it was regular Army, draftees, reserve, National Guard. It should have been the way it is now. They changed this quick because so many people died in Vietnam. They changed it to regular Army, reserve, National Guard, and draftees. So draftees are last now because out of that 58,312 or whatever the count is right now, there were a lot of draftees, 18 years old. And I love the stories because it happened to INCO. One day they came to me in my office and said, hey, you know, the major had a heart attack. So you're going to be the operations officer for the entire Mekong Delta. And here I am, 25. They used to call me old man. Hey, old man, he's 25. He's not 18 like the rest of us. But and so if it were in business, it would say you've just risen to the level of your incompetence. You know, and I had to, but you have people in the field that are out there, and if you make a mistake or if you don't hand in stuff, they could die. And so it becomes an amazing burden. And so on the one hand, you know, Tim O'Brien has a story here that's his own version of it, but I think everybody who's out there has experienced this stuff. And the best story I have to know about the American government is they had an early release program in 1970 that they announced like an early release and go back to school. And I had written the dean of the graduate school in UVA from the middle of the Mekong Delta. And I said, I want come back this fall. And I was going to be still in the Army, but I just did it anyway. And he wrote me back into the middle of APO San Francisco. And he wrote me back and said, you're accepted and you're going to have a McIntyre Fellowship. So I said, all right. So I filed up my papers and applied for an early release from the Armed Services. And it went up the line in Vietnam, and they said, rejected. So they rejected it. So I took my paper and came home, where I was assigned to Fort Bragg with the Airborne, where we're going to have to jump out of airplanes. Oh my goodness, did not want to be doing that. And they said, hey, do you know there's an early release program? And so I said, you mean an early release to go back to school? He said, yeah. And so I went from my house to the HR office at Fort Bragg so fast, ripped the paper off the top that said rejected, and said, here it is. And he said, God, how did you do that so fast? And of course, this time it's approved. So the lesson there for the Army is, never believe what they tell you the first time. Second time you're going to be okay. That was before they were going to give us airborne training. That's not what I wanted to do with 525 and my thing. And of course, when you come back to Charlottesville, out of my graduate class, 42 people were in the graduate history department, males, and 26 of them got drafted out. That's a generation of people. Think about it, 26 out of 42. And several of us met on the steps of Memorial Gym, the old gym, where they had those IBM cards where you sign up for your class in the ancient days. And we'd actually met at our next session, all gone back to school. Other questions?
I think we have time for one
Oh, one more. Oh, yes, we're
Okay,
bumping into the next meeting.
let me understand what you just said. What you read and what you read, were these things that the school board banned? Is that what you're saying? Thank you.
So, the Martin Luther King speech is, that's one of them. Tim O'Brien, they actually have that on 2 sessions on Tim O'Brien in the Ken Burns series. So,
Thank you all very much. When I think about censorship, and as it has applied here locally with our schools, there's the issue of denying intellectual freedom, certainly the overall message there. But I think about it too in terms of, in terms of the school board's actions, it really reflected, I thought, a lack of trust of parents. Because parents know best what their children are ready to read or discuss, and they overrode that system. It also shows a lack of trust for our teachers, our professional educators, and librarians, and people with advanced degrees and years of experience. So that is really a terrible message to send, especially in a county like this where you're working hard to retain teachers on low pay or recruit teachers. So we're sending out, in my view, all the wrong messages. But I think finally, importantly, and this speaks to Andrew's question, it removes an opportunity, it denies an opportunity for our students to have a meaningful discussion in class and debate the merits of these wars, or debate the merits of certain foreign policies and so forth.
good point.
And I think about, we talk about indoctrination, or some people talk about indoctrination, and I think when you are removing materials and denying these sorts of discussions, that's a form of indoctrination. So I think that's something that we